some institutions. Okay, good afternoon everybody. Welcome. It's a beautiful Thursday afternoon. I think this morning the clouds, there was a lot of grey clouds and I thought it was going to rain, but it's looking good. A bit windy, but it's looking great. So, welcome to the Cape Town Museum of Childhood's Insta Chats. My name is Siona O'Connell and I'm so happy that you guys have decided to join us today. So today we have a very special guest. We have, well, she told me not to call her doctor, but I'm just going to say it for now, for the intro, Dr. Siona O'Connell. She is a professor at the University of Pretoria. She has published widely, curated numerous exhibitions, and directed and produced numerous films as well. She's also the author of the book, The Impossible Return, and it's a book on the forced removals in Cape Town. And she is also the director and producer of a brilliant documentary film called The Weinberg 7. So we're so happy to have her with us today, and I'm going to ask you guys to give this virtual round of applause as we welcome in Siona O'Connell. Let's just see, there we go. Welcome, thanks for joining us. We did a test earlier on, guys, so this should work and work smoothly. So let's see. Hello, there we go.
Hi.
Hi, how?
The show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's so good to have you here. So guys, this is Siona O'Connell, Dr. Siona O'Connell, but she said, please call me Siona. Leave the doctor alone. I'm just Siona. So we're so happy to have you here today, and I'm so excited for this conversation. I think those of you who are joining, you're going to learn a lot from Siona today, and I just think it's going to be a conversation that's going to make you reflect and think about, you know, your certain attitudes towards things, and just also really not taking for granted what people went through during the struggles, especially the traumas that they endured. So Siona, I would like to know, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you currently do? What is your day job?
I'm not sure if the bosses are listening to this. In short, I'm a dead ordinary woman from Warm Estate. In fact, I'm speaking to you from Warm Estate. This is
Cool.
this grew up. And I'm a late developer. I only go to university very, you know, I was by far the oldest in my class. But having said that, we were raised in a home that politicized us at an early age. We lived in Warm Estate. We attended Holy Cross Catholic Church with Father Basil van Wynberg, who was at the forefront largely in many ways of the anti-apartheid struggle. So for a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old growing up in Holy Cross, having made my first communion with all my other 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old friends, this business of forced removals had a very I could notice it every Sunday, because every Sunday there'd be somebody else missing from their allocated pew. You know, the Sings would sit in one, the Adamses would sit in another pew, and depending on when they were evicted, these pews just emptied up. And obviously to a youngster, it's bewildering because you just don't know where they've gone. They literally vanished into the air. Coupled with the fact that Father Basil, as we knew him, was constantly arrested, was constantly in solitary confinement, as well as family members. We were aware of what was happening at a young age. So it's no coincidence then that the roots of a fight against injustice is instilled in me and our siblings and everybody actually in this area from a very young age. I was lucky.
Sorry, Siona, I wanted to ask, just on the point where you said, you know, you were a young child and you kind of saw people the pews becoming empty and emptier. Did you ask your parents like what was going on, or did they explain to you like, listen, when we go to church and we see the benches becoming empty, it's because people are having to move?
No, there was a sense of silence around it all, even though the Hands of District 6 campaign was something we listened to from the pulpit. We certainly saw, because we used to go down to Hanover Street all the time. We used to go to the Bioscope, but 80 seconds, the fish shop, the spice shop, as well as my lived in Roger Street. So we always were in that house. But I think the most profound memory that I have is of that house in District 6. That was a working class house. You can only describe it as that. But this was the home of Ma and Ba, where we went there, and Karen lived there, and Sharon, and the kids. And then they got the eviction notices. And my grandparents were the first to move out of the house. Remember, it was a multi-generational house. They were the first to be moved, and they moved to Hanover Park. And I can remember that flat clearly. It was on the 3rd floor. I remember the smell of it, the dampness of it, and the fact it was just grey and in the sea of nothing. In the sea of nothing. The memory that I have is of my grandfather, who always was, we were dead scared of him because he seemed, and he loomed large in our lives. You know, he kept the rain. He was also a man, even though he wasn't formally educated, could read Greek and speak Greek. He read the classics. He could talk to us about poetry, and we could see this man and more so my grandfather, just visibly shrink to the point. You know, I see photos of him taken afterwards when he came to visit us. He seemed shorter. He seemed more frail, and he shouldn't have been. You know, he would have been in his 60s. You know, obviously they say in Hanover Park before they get moved to my aunt's house in Wynberg, which was so this business of, and then of course my uncle and aunt and their 3 kids stay there till the bitter end, and he's the last house to be removed or to be mowed down in Roger Street. And they literally had cut off the sewerage and the water, and he was surrounded by a moat. And you know, there's long-lasting traumas inflicted on his children and his wife, his then wife, persist. So I think it drives me, which certainly drove me to do my work on forced removals. And my doctoral thesis was on that. You know, how do we... looking at District 6 as a graveyard and at our family photographs, kind of embalm these memories. And so it was a quick jump for me to do all the films. I need to be upfront with everybody. I'm not a filmmaker. I've never studied film. I just was spring queen on the clothing and textile industry. That was my first one that really well Emmy Award-winning director Paul Yule worked on with me, and then I just learned the ropes really quickly and went on to be quite prolific. So I think after Spring Queen, I did something called movie snaps. These are those little photographs that most people in Cape Town will have, either of themselves as children or going to town with their parents as children. And I think I made movie snaps. And then I realized it was the anniversary of the Weinberg 7. When they would have been when they would have been arrested in 85, and punished that nobody had, or not more had made of the Weinberg 7 tragedy. In many ways, it is subsumed maybe by the Trojan Horse massacre, which happens on the exact same day, and possibly possibly the same time, which explains why journalists were in Athlone rather than many of them in Weinberg. So it happens on the same day.
Sorry, Sheena, I just wanted to say something. I must say Nadine Kluter, the lady who made Action Commandant, she's watching. So hey Nadine, thanks for joining us.
Shout out, heads up in the trophy.
What did I want? Oh, yes. So on one of our other Insta chats, we had Tabara Mitzi, and he played is an actor, and he played the role of Solomon Mahlangu in the film Kalushi. And the one thing he said that is so true is that lots of our history, we're not necessarily learning in the classroom at school, we're learning through art. So it's through movies like Action Commandant, it's through your documentary film like the Weinberg 7 that kind of is educating our people. But it's also sad because why are we not learning about this in our schools? And then also just one other point I wanted to say, I had a chat with my partner, and I was having a chat with my grandfather, and he was telling us the history of our church. And he was saying how, where Jakes Gerwel, Vanguard Road is now, he's like, that was all bush. And even if we, or myself, I'm 28 now, I'm still kind of young. If I go into, my grandfather lived in Nova Park, and so when we went in there, it was full of houses, it had its little winkeltjes and so forth. So we don't know, though, when people moved to these areas, when they were forcibly moved from their homes, it was like barren land. There was nothing for those people. So I just wanted to mention that, because I know you spoke about your grandparents moving to a Nova Park and there was like nothing around there.
No, I agree with you. I remember the dust. Eventually my uncle goes to Mitchell's Plain. Even then, that was in the earlier days, and nothing seemed to grow. It was always windy and nothing seemed to grow, and things were and also you didn't recognize the neighbors. So this idea that new communities could magically emerge out of the mess is laughable, because just because maybe everybody were colored, these were all colored folk, you didn't know your neighbor from a bar of soap. So questions of how do you trust them well enough to borrow $20? Do you trust your kids? And the kind of work that I'm doing now comes up that actually no, they couldn't, which explains the Cape Flats today. It explains why youth and men were drawn elsewhere. Men left their families in droves. The divorce rates shot up through forced removals to flats. Alcoholism use shot up, and youth the younger got drawn to the gangs, where they found a sense of place and belonging, because they of course had no idea how they ended up being in a place like Bonteville or Lavender Hill. My other uncle ends up in Lavender Hill, and so only starting to think about these intergenerational traumas and effects, and how what happened to possibly even your great grandparent is visited on 4, 5, 6-year-old great grandchild right now, in terms of economic opportunities, because there was an economic cost to people moving out. They had to travel further to get to work. They had to travel further to get to schools. If they couldn't keep their kids in the local schools, they then had to find new places out in Mitchell's Plain and so forth, which are completely alien. I heard of just literally kids being put into buses and allocated schools. And through my work interviewing kids from Harthill Village, would have been maybe toddlers or 4, 5 years old at the time, articulate words like, we were just, 1 minute we were at home in Harthill, the next minute my parents sent me to live in this house, to spend the night at this house, Mitchell's Plain, and we never went back.
Wow.
Best friend who I always played with me never went back. And remember, this is the days before social media. So that sense of connection is absolutely severed, as is the who they are, how fair or unfair the world is, and so it sets in motion a whole other kinds of stuff. And we see this downward spiral into poverty. We see the kinds of effects on mental, or the work that we're doing now is looking at the effects on emotional well-being as well as cognitive well-being. How well can they function? How well can they plan forward, for forward planning? Can they save for a rainy day? All of that is impacted by that moment.
Yeah. Sheena, so you wrote this book called Impossible Return, and it's about the forced removals in Cape Town. What inspired you to write this book? Where did your interest in where did your interest come? What sparked your interest in writing about the forced removals in Cape Town?
people will probably say to you, Sheena, why are you doing this? You kind of, you've done well enough. You've traveled. You managed to scrape together a PhD. And a disclaimer here: I'm not bright. How many get this is just besides the point. I think it stems back to my grandparents' removal. It stems back to those moments in the church, but it also stems back to, he speaks to me now, especially in a city like Cape Town, where it is so starkly friggin' divided that I'm astonished that 1994 has come and gone. You can, prior to lockdown, it would make me ill to my stomach to go to restaurants and to see the only people of color would be those serving me. And people being completely oblivious, or those going into Kirstenbosch, overwhelmingly white. Even though, Kirstenbosch itself represents this first line of division. Van Riebeck's bitter almond hedge that he plants there, pretty much as soon as he comes, to divide the locals from the colonials, is still flourishing in Kirstenbosch. And you take a walk along, if you ever take a hike along any of the the southern part of Table Mountain, like up Cecilia Ridge, and you're able to look down on Bishop's Court, Newlands, and Claremont, you'll see these lines of division absolutely acute, and you'll see Van Riebeck's task of keeping people separate flourishing to its fullest. And you see that in literally the land, because if you overlook Constantia, Bishop's Court, you've got to struggle to find the houses, because they're houses in massive plots, surrounded by beautiful greenery and light. Oh, surely you can see the swimming pools and the tennis courts. Yeah. But you see these massive plots, and it's lush, and it's a biblical Garden of Eden. And then, of course, you look further afield, you cross the M5 and then the M3 and the M5, and then you start to see the Cape Flats. And then you've got to struggle to find the green, because nothing grows. It's packed on top of one another. But those lines are clear. And on top of the mountain, I said to somebody, I think of this as white noise. If you get these fancy speakers that cancels out all noise, so it kind of brings in something called white noise, so you don't hear anything. And I think that sums up the blindness to what is really happening in Cape Town and what has happened, as well as the silence. Silence is a bit. So my job is always, I say, I'm going to go through Cape Town suburb by suburb. So I've done the 6, I've done Harfield, Claremont, next is Newlands, Deep River, Plumstead. Uma Mestre from UWC has done phenomenal work out on Tramway Road and Sea Point and so forth. But I think my job, my work is not big in any great scheme of things. It doesn't sum up, or doesn't work on millions and millions of people. I really look at little pockets like Harfield Village, which is 90,000 residents, in an attempt to say you mattered, your story mattered, whether you were a homeowner or a tenant. Somebody called Jane Smith lived here. Somebody called Jane Smith received that notice that some called the love letter, that was going to career their mind, their lives off in an altogether unimaginable universe. And Jane Smith's kids and grandkids and great-grandkids are tied to this legacy. They're not separate from it. And it's in telling stories, making it available through art, through cartoons, through film, through exhibitions, virtual exhibitions, through conversations like this, that I think the youth, especially those on the Cape Flats, will come to understand that this is not their fault. That regardless how hard their parents and their grandparents worked, there's something called a poverty trap, that if you're born into a poverty trap, it's so unlikely you will get out of it. So no matter how hard you work, the system is geared in such a way to pull you down. But also, there can't only be a story of doom and gloom. It needs, for me, it is to get back to those the resilience and the community links that flourished during apartheid, that saw communities rally around kids and their parents who were in jail, who rallied around neighbors who were moving, squeezed a food parcel into that truck as it was lumbering down a road. I think we've lost that. We've lost the ability to stand together as a community, even if it's a street community to start off with, to say we matter, we know where we come from, to hold the past to account, and to imagine new ways of being. And I think it's through the youth really, who hold the possibilities in their hands.
Yeah. So talking about youth, we celebrated Youth Day last week, I think, or was it the week before? I think it was last week. Yeah, the week. I'm so, with the lockdown, every day seems the same. But anyway, so we decided for our social media platforms, we were gonna recognize and acknowledge youth who played an instrumental role during the Apartheid era. So we recognized Ashley Creel, Solomon Mahlangu, there's somebody else that slips my mind. And then we also recognize the Weinberg 7. And again, I didn't know about the Weinberg 7. My one of my colleagues shared a clip in our work WhatsApp group, and I watched it, and oh my word, it was so eye-opening. It tugs on your emotions. It leaves you with all kinds of feels. So I wanted to ask if you could just tell the people a little bit about the Weinberg 7 and why it was so important for you to tell their story.
Well, I'm going to give a heads up here. So the film will be available online, free tomorrow. We will load it tomorrow on our website. Perhaps you can share that later.
Definitely.
So from tomorrow, Weinberg 7 is already on the site, and tomorrow afternoon, An Impossible Return will also be there. So I think it's important. The film tells its story in many ways, especially through the parents and the family and those who were involved in the story of these 7 youngsters who could have been any 7 youngsters on that day. It could well, just think of students in a street and in a house and out of control, power hungry police fanatics actually coming in and just rounding up kids. And so this group emerges out of, and it gets whittled down because one person had her sentence kind of commuted till she was 18 because she's still too young. One left the country and went to Mozambique. But the 7, as they are now, as they are in the film, end up spending, 6 of them spend a year in Pollsmoor prison, and Wayne is the last one who spends 2 years. And that is, it was 2 years of a big public awareness and public fight to keep these youngsters out of Pollsmoor. But the state was determined to make a case out of them, because normally youngsters arrested would be beaten up, maybe taken to the cells, beaten up, roughed up in the police van and so forth, and then released. Unlike this however, didn't happen with the Weinberg 7. The state at that stage was on the up, which is ridiculous, because barely 89, 90 is when the negotiations had started already about the release of Mandela and so forth. But these kids go into prison at a time where the state is upping its game, and they land. So it's Venetia and Dee. They go into the women's prison, and Wayne, Shoki, Julian, Nasir, and it's called age. They go to I can shoot myself for not remembering. They end up going to Pollsmoor prison, which one can imagine what it would have been like. There are some scenes in the film of that day that they're taken into jail. And the reason I was drawn to telling the story is because I know Julian. We share an aunt by marriage.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I lived in Swaziland then. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to Swaziland, which of course politicized me in a completely different way, because it was the home of exiles. and the school Waterford was, this was the stuff we spoke about all the time. So I think it was no coincidence then that I was even more encouraged, or this memory of Julian really saturates mine from about 85 onwards. And I remember phoning home and my dad and mom saying, Julian, he was arrested and they tried to do this and back in the newspaper, and then eventually Julian's going to jail. And it always bothered me. And then when I get the chance, when I'm now an academic and I'm drawn to telling these untold stories, and I start searching Google for the Weinberg 7, and there's very little online. I'm sure you'd have done the same thing. You see a little bit in the TRC, possibly Julian's stuff in the TRC records, or D, but largely there's nothing there. And so in 2015, I stupidly, maybe naively, decide, no, I'm going to tell the story of the Weinberg 7, and I get to them all together except Nasir, who he couldn't make the flight. He couldn't make the flight down from the Eastern Cape, and obviously Shoki, who he's gravely ill. But I get all the others together for dinner at the Elfin Hotel in Constantia. I thought, the irony of this. This is where we're heading. And they come together, and I can't begin to explain what those emotions were like. I may well as, in fact, I ought not to have been there. You could see that this was a group who had last seen each other as a group when they walked into Paulsmoor Prison. And then in 2015, they come together again. But since then, they had, up to then, they had, maybe Julian had kept in touch with Wayne, or Dee had kept in touch with Venetia. Perhaps but this was the first time. And to hear them speak about going in, but also to sit on the sidelines and to hear them connect as a group, and you realize it had been decades since this had happened, and how much had been lost and sacrificed by this group was, I think, the thing that astonished me and angered me most. And to hear still that literally today as you speak, the majority of them still have their criminal records, that the government to date has not bothered to expunge the records that they had as a result of doing their bit in the fight for freedom, and the huge sacrifices that they paid, as well as their families.
So Sheena, I just wanted to read some of the comments, because we do want to acknowledge, we always love to acknowledge the people that join us, because they take time out of their busy schedules to join us. Michaela says, our history books clearly need to be rewritten. This history is so important. Nadia Kamis says this, that is what apartheid destroyed, the sense of community. Cindy Mendoza says, thanks so much for sharing. She can't wait to watch the Weinberg 7 documentary film. And Karisha says, brilliant as well. Looking forward to watching and learning, as well as Craig, he says he will definitely check it out. So there is clearly a big interest, and just from what you were sharing, I think people see the importance of learning and watching this film, but also learning, as they watch it. So I know you said 30 minutes, so I want to stick to the time. It's now already 1:30, and we have this tradition where we always end off with a game. So before we go to the game, my last question is this. What do you want people to take from your work when people watch the Impossible Return, when they read the book, when they watch the Weinberg 7 documentary film? What is it that you want people to take from your work?
That everybody has agency. We are able to do amazing things if we stand together and stand on the shoulders of those who want to support us. That we have to reach out and reconnect in the way we did in the 80s and 90s, and start making a difference. And a simple difference for now, right, would be for some kind of petition to government, a large petition to government to get rid of the records of the Weinberg 7. That is something easy to do, not asking any of us to protest anywhere. It's, you know, if youth in fact could take that up, get an online or some kind of petition going to government that they will have to respond to, would be good. But the message is that we don't have the privilege of wasting another 25, 30 years waiting for change to come. The Cape Flats and COVID, the way it's exploding on the Cape Flats, is because people are piled up on top of one another. And the Cape Flats is a direct result of what happened with the Group Areas Act of 1950. Cape Town needs to wake up and realize that, and that it cannot be business as usual. And I'm certainly available and keen to anyone who wants to join up to say, let's make things happen, street by street, area by area, until Cape Town lives up to the promise that it had and doesn't live out the misery that was instituted in 1652 with the arrival of Van Riebeeck.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Sheena, for sharing that. And I think you said a very important word, and that's, you know, don't wait for change, be the change agent. And that's what I get a lot from youth, you know, who fought against the apartheid regime, is that they were going to be the change. They weren't going to sit down and wait. I mean, I think I read something somewhere or listened to something that said the adults would have discussions during apartheid about what they should do, but the youth did. You know, the youth, they did. So let's be the change agents that we can and should be. So I want to end off with a game. We play this with all our guests. It's fun. It's just, so this is how it works. It's easy. I'm going to read out a little statement and you just say the very first thing that comes to your mind. The other tradition that we have is there's one question that might require you to sing a line or two. So I don't know if you've got any vocal exercises that you need to do to just warm up those vocals. Everybody has done it. From last week we had Jimmy Nevis, Nadine Rutte sang. Everybody, I mean, people who aren't actually even singers sang. So I think that don't break the chain, Sheena. Okay, let's go. Your favorite childhood food, what was it?
Pumpkin breedy.
Lekker. Okay, your favorite childhood book?
Papers 5.
Okay, your favorite childhood toy?
Jane, my doll.
Sweet. Okay, tell us a bit about Jane.
You know, Jane had blonde hair. I don't understand, Jane had blonde hair. But like family who, you know, everybody here we consider family. Auntie, well, Mrs. Jurgens, we treat like a granny, she used to make Jane's dresses. She was a seamstress. So Jane always had the most top-end dresses. Jane.
That is so cool. Okay, shout out to Jane the doll. Your favorite singer or band when you were younger? Childhood singer or band?
Oh, ABBA.
ABBA. Okay, so I mean, ABBA, I vaguely remember some of the songs they sing, but can you just remind the people what an ABBA song sounds like?
Dancing Queen, something like that.
Brilliant. I get it. I know it. It's Dancing Queen. Feel the beat from the tambourine. Oh, yeah. Okay, great. I remember. You see, you just sang that line, Sheena, and I got it. So thank you. It was like note for note. You just gave me the note and I finished it there. Okay, your favorite childhood teacher?
Miss February at Zonnebloem Girls.
Okay. Shout out to Miss February.
February, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you remember what grade you were in?
I was standard 2. I adored her. Adored her.
Okay. Shout out to Miss February. Okay. Last one. If you could sum up your childhood in one word, what would it be?
Special.
Special. Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that or just leave it there? It's okay if you want to leave it there as well.
No, it's special. I was lucky enough to be in a home with my grandmother who cooked for us at 3 o'clock. When we came back from school, we had that. I was lucky enough to have a mom who believed that despite the fact that we were colored, she would insist on us doing ballet lessons at Holy Cross Church. Special in that we listened to squad cars on a Friday night, and my dad would make burgers. So burgers was, for older listeners, squad cars is his radio show. They prowl the lonely streets at night. So I can call it special. So I'd say special.
Okay. And then, so we've come to the end of the interview, Sheena. Is there any last words for me? Anybody you kind of want to give a little shout out to?
To the Weinberg 7, definitely. And to my son, Seamus.
Okay. So, hi, Seamus. You have a really awesome mom. So, Sheena, thank you so much. I almost wish that we didn't have a time limit, because I feel like we could have spoken for hours and I would have gained such a lot of knowledge. I'm sure all of us have just learned such a lot. So thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. I know you also have a busy schedule, but just thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for sharing your love for the history of our country, and, you know, just reminding us like what the great sacrifices that people did, like the Weinberg Sevens, and not just the Weinberg Seven, but their families as well, you know. And just thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate it. And we hope that you have a beautiful Thursday.
Keep well. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for joining. Bye.